There are some memories from childhood that never really fade, just lingering in the back of your mind like shadows cast by some dim light. For me, it's a house that I can still picture with unnerving clarity even after all these years. It was a place that always just felt wrong. It had an atmosphere, a heaviness that settled into every room, into the bones of the walls even. And even as a child, I knew there was something off about it. For a good few months, I recall that every night I was plagued by the same dream. I'd be standing on the stairs, at the top of the stairs, and an entity would grab a hold of me and throw me down the stairs and kill me. This dream happened again and again and again. It was a strange, bird-like figure, in the dream at least, sort of half human, half hawk, or something hideous like that. The stairs were always the centrepiece of the nightmare, the place where it took place. They were quite dark and narrow and somewhat suffocating. It was as if the house was drawing me to that location, trying to pull me deeper and deeper with each dream. But it wasn't just the dreams that told me the house was wrong, in ways that I couldn't understand back then. There was always a scratching noise in the walls as you climbed the stairs, a soft sort of incessant scrabbling that seemed to follow me up the stairs as I climbed them. And the staircase itself wasn't remarkable. It was an ugly brown late 70s early 80s carpeted affair with wooden panels on the walls, but the noise came from inside the wood itself, like something was trying to escape or trying to get me to acknowledge that it was there. One day I asked my mother about it, and she was standing in the kitchen with her back to me doing something mundane, washing dishes, I think, something like that. I said, "What's that scratching noise?" And she hesitated. And just for a moment, I saw her fingers tightening slightly on the dishcloth. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a little bit too casual. "Oh, it's probably just a bird trapped in the chimney. It'll fly out eventually." Now, even at that age, I knew that something wasn't quite adding up, because how long can a bird survive in a chimney before it either dies or does fly away? This noise continued for weeks and months. And besides, the chimney wasn't anywhere near the staircase. It was on the opposite side of the house, in the living room. Eventually, I asked her again, and she changed her answer this time. She couldn't quite meet my gaze. "It's probably just mice," she said, almost to herself. There was no reassurance in her voice. She was afraid of something. She didn't want to say it out loud. The scratching, it didn't sound like mice. It wasn't a sort of scurrying or rustling. It was a slow and deliberate noise, and it followed me up and down the stairs. And then one morning, something happened that I can just never forget. It was early, and my father had been working late shifts back then, riding to and from work on a moped, and he always wore these old black gloves when he rode. I woke up as normal, did all the usual morning things that you do, and then began to head downstairs, and heard the scratching again. I noticed that my parents' bedroom door was slightly ajar, so I tried to be extra quiet, not wanting to wake my father, who, frankly, could be violent. And it was best to just keep out of his way and not bother him. As I stepped onto the second stair, I glanced up, and on the edge of the door frame there were two hands, with black gloves, reaching around the side of the door and slowly and deliberately pulling it open. It wasn't a breeze, it was a deliberate motion, like whoever was behind the door was trying to open it slowly. At first, I just thought, well, it must be my dad, of course it's my dad, and he's just getting changed or something and wants to go to sleep, so I nimbly rushed down the stairs as quietly as I could. At this point, I wasn't afraid. But when I got to the kitchen and found my mother there again, I sort of casually said, "I almost woke Dad up, but I've sneaked down as best I could." And she idly just replied, "Your dad hasn't come home yet. He's still at work." My heart just stopped. The way those fingers lingered on the door, a definite, deliberate motion, the fingers curled around the wood, gripping it almost tenderly, and then beginning to pull the door open, inch by inch. Her words hit me like a block of ice. I sat there with my hands shaking, trying to process what I'd seen. He wasn't home. He hadn't come home yet. So what the hell was in that room? I never told anybody about what I'd seen that morning. I'll never forget the sight of just those black gloves curled around the door, trying to coax me inside. My father was a violent man, a bully. I assume he still is. But he wasn't afraid of things like the dark and horror movies and all that stuff. Enjoyed them a bit too much, I think. But there was one day when I saw real fear in his eyes. So we'd been out, and my mother was trying to teach him to drive, actually. And as usual, he'd lost his temper, and when he got back, he was in one of his foul moods, and I remember him storming off, heading around the house to the back door, and I remember him stopping dead in his tracks. He'd reached this little black wooden door in the side of the house. It was something like a coal hole or a cellar, although we never went inside. He just stopped, like he'd hit an invisible wall. He stood there staring at the door. His whole body was tensed, as if he was listening for something. And then slowly, he backed away. I'd never seen him react like that to anything before. But he backed away from a door. He said he felt like he shouldn't get any closer to that door. We never talked about it, but I knew in that moment that whatever was in the house scared him as well. We moved out of that house a few years later, but even now, the odd dream happens now and then. The room I slept in, those stairs, that scratching in the walls, and those gloved fingers pulling open the bedroom door. Whatever it was in that house, whatever made those gloves move, I don't think it was tied to the house. I'm quite convinced that whatever that thing was tied to my father, and I think it still is. But what is it? What was it that wanted me to go into that room that day? I don't know. I don't ever want to know. But I feel like it's an entity that fed off his rage and his cruelty. Maybe it made him the man he was, but I think he was like that already. Maybe it tried to pull me in because did it want me to be just like him? I still have a fear of those gloved fingers reaching around another door, waiting to finish what had started.